Welcome to the Sound on Sound People and Music Industry podcast channel with me, Kevin Paul. In this episode, I talk to producer Ben Hillier. He discusses with me his early beginnings, about how he got into the studio, working with Depeche Mode, working with Nadine Shah, and how he gets drum machines to jam with each other. Tell me about the studio here, because it's a lovely, vibey little place in the middle of nowhere. I understand it's been built with hay.
Yes, yeah. Straw, actually.
Straw. Okay. Is there a difference?
There is, yeah. Straw is basically like wood. It's whereas hay is grass, the bit that cows eat. Whereas straw is the stuff that has corn growing on the end of it.
Okay.
So it's inert.
I'm glad we've clarified.
Yeah,
that.
There you go. Yeah, very important difference. So we've got a few units in a big barn in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, and we built inside the units. We built a couple of control rooms with straw bale walls, specifically for the acoustic and for the insulation. Yeah. So it's really nice and warm in here. And it doesn't cost us anything to heat. We are in the middle of nowhere, so you do need that in the winter.
Yeah, sure.
And it's acoustically, it's great because it sort of absorbs the high frequencies in a pleasant manner, and it doesn't, because the walls are quite they're not very stiff and hard. Right. It doesn't tend to reflect low end either. The low end sort of goes straight through the walls, so you don't get a lot of standing waves. So it's
great, perfect for mixing.
Perfect for mixing, yeah. And I quite like recording in here as well, actually. Yeah. It's pretty good. We did, I think most of the drums for Nadine's third album, for Holiday Destination, were done in my room. Yeah. In the control room.
In the actual control room?
Yeah, because it's not... I use a really big resonant old drum kit from the big old Slingerland Radio King.
Yeah.
And if you put it in a big acoustic, it sounds enormous, a bit too rocky. But if you put it in a real dead acoustic, you get all the resonance of the drums really clear. Yeah, and it's got enough going on in the sound to not need to have a lot of room on it or anything like that. So it actually sounds better really dry.
I wasn't sure what to expect actually when I came to the studio, but the feeling here, I mean, is very rustic. It's almost homemade.
It is homemade.
Yeah, I mean, both in its appearance and the sort of the vibe here. It's very conducive to just working, but in a way that maybe allows the artist to think about what they're doing a little bit differently. You know, there's no carpets on the walls or stuff like that, which doesn't necessarily mean anything particularly.
Yeah,
is that something you've deliberately done?
Yeah, I mean, I want it to be creative and want it to feel like something where you can build stuff and make stuff and it sort of get your hands dirty and get in amongst it, rather than it being too it's not hugely comfortable, but you tend to get here and just work. So we work short, fast days here. We don't tend to work really late, but we don't need to, because there's no distractions. You know, we're sort of 2 miles away from the nearest cappuccino, so there's not anything going on to distract you, apart from going for a nice walk in the countryside, which is quite nice sometimes.
Yeah, of course,
a lot of artists like to do that, just disappear off and walk through the fields for a bit and clear their heads. Yeah, it means we can work in a very applied way. Yeah, so it's good.
Tell me about, how did you get into engineering and the studio? Because are you a musician?
I started off playing in orchestras, playing percussion in orchestras, and then I studied that. When I left school, I started studying music, all classical stuff, doing grades and reading and all that sort of thing. And I played drums as well. Okay. But I was it was mainly classical percussion was what I was studying. I was recorded playing in an orchestra for a Benjamin Britten piece that was written for amateur and professional musicians, a piece called Noah's Flood, which is an opera specifically written to mix professional and amateur players. Okay. And as one of the amateur players, you know, I was like 18 or something. So and that was recorded for Virgin Classics by a company called Floating Earth, who were one of the, I think they're still going. They're one of the top sort of classical recording independent classical recording companies, because at that
was
time
it a mobile thing?
they've got a mobile studio, and they would go around to orchestras wherever. This was Bournemouth, so Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, and they would go to where the orchestras played, and they would hire the hall, where their hall, and record them in that over a couple of days, and record CDs of symphonies and whatever.
And how did you? Is that was your first inkling of the studio?
So I just followed the cables around. I think we were having a break. I followed the cables around and ended up in this control room. I was like, wow, I like this. This is good.
Really? Was it immediate? Was it like?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and they were really friendly. They were like, oh, so they sort of looked at me and said, "Oh, come in, so come and have a look," And I was like, "This is great."
Wow.
And they, I was just chatting to them, and the producer said, invited me to go and see the editing. So they were he was editing it together it was very early digital editing. He'd just gone to, so this was 1988 maybe.
What's that? What's that? Sony or
Sony DAE 1000s.
Yeah. Okay.
So with the U-matic machines and all that stuff. And so I went to an edit suite in London, and I just went out there for the day and had a nose around and looked at it, and and I was at college in Devon at the time, and luckily the engineer, a guy called Mike Hatch, who was a fantastic engineer, he had a very bad grasp of geography, and he said, "Oh yeah, we're recording the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra quite a lot. So do you want to be our assistant down there?" Yeah, all right. It's only a 3-hour drive. So I jumped at the chance of doing that. So I went and started doing classical assisting for him, which was really exciting. So you're running they recorded to 2 U-matics and 2 DAT tapes, sorry. So as backups, and as the assistant, you were basically helping rig the whole studio. So they'd turn up with a van, and you'd be plugging all the cables in and running multi-cores and stuff like that. Yeah. They'd record with about 20 mics, I think, for a full symphony orchestra.
So it's pretty detailed. So they give you a good oversee of the process, as it were.
Absolutely, yeah. And then you'd be and then he'd be balancing live to 2-track.
Yeah.
So once you'd had one session, that was pretty much his job done. He was just monitoring levels and watching out for any technical problems, you know. And then I was doing sort of running the tape machines and IDing things
them and
scribbling
stuff,
down, and making sure that everything was labelled and so they could find all the takes in the right place, and just being part of it. And it's a really exciting process, actually, recording classical stuff, especially the last half hour. Because they have a whole list of takes that they've got to get through, and you've got it's like anything up to 100 musicians in the orchestra, and if you go overtime, it costs you.
That's right. Yeah, the musicians' union rates are pretty spot on.
All of a sudden you're going way over budget, and so the last sort of 10 or 15 minutes you might be doing sort of 20 or 30 takes of tiny little sections. So it's like bosh, 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 and the level of concentration. It's very exciting to be involved with that many people, really focused and really concentrated, and you're banging in ID points on the DAT machines and just like scribbling everything down. So I was very lucky to be allowed to, at that age, to be allowed to be involved in something that sort of because if I screwed it up, there would have been.
That's it.
Yeah, they wouldn't have recorded anything, So it wasn't computer recording in those days. So
that's right.
It was pre DAEs. Those engineers had all been trained at a place called the Tom Meister course in Guildford in Surrey University, and they said you should go there because that's a really good. I was wondering what to do next, and they sort of recommended that, and because I'd worked with them, that gave me quite a good in to that course, and I went there, and they had great equipment because it was originally set up by the BBC in the 60s. So they had like these sort of like Neve 1073s lying around, and I think they had something like 4 C12s and 2 C24s.
Oh my God.
And like valve 47s just knocking about, and those are just the normal mics you used, and everyone was like, "Oh yeah, they're a bit noisy." But those were the days when it was sort of like they weren't the new thing, Everyone was everyone was saying, you should use the 414 because it's nice and quiet.
Yeah,
and I was lucky. I was digging, and they had a VCS3 and stuff like that. All
really?
These things knocking about that just blew my mind. I was just getting them out. These sound amazing, and this, the VCS3. I think I was one of the few people that ever bothered even getting it out of the store, because you had to sign everything out to use
course,
it. I remember getting that thing out and just struggling to get it to make any noise at all, but just being really excited by it. And I was very lucky with the timing, because at that point DAWs were just becoming viable.
When would this have been? 90s? Early 90s?
Yeah, 1990.
1990.
So you were just getting Sound Tools.
Yes, that would have been the first one, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Sound
so Pro Tools wasn't available then. It was Sound Tools, and they had an 8-track version which didn't really work, but they had a 2-track version and Sonic Solutions and stuff like that, and Cubase audio sort of
was just starting, wasn't it? 4-track of Cubase audio.
Yeah, and it was all
worked.
All very tentative. None of it really worked properly, and it was sort of and I was doing a lot of classical editing, but as part of the course as well, which was that was all DAE 1000s or dash tapes, and so just learning all of that was very prescient. It was the perfect time to do it, because it meant that then I did an industrial year in Eden Studios in London.
Yeah, I remember.
And I meant that I could do all that stuff, and everybody in the I could do all the digital editing and knew how to get Sound Tools to work. And Pro Tools was just turning up, and it was exactly the same as Sound Tools, effectively.
But it was the four-channel one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was two units together.
That's right. Yeah, and it was sort of like version
Never worked.
Pro Tools 2 or 4 or something. I don't know why it was Pro Tools 1. Nobody ever saw that.
Never made it out.
And so that was, and I started working with people like Steve Osborne and Paul Oakenfold there. They were in that studio all the time, and so I became their sort of main assistant while I was there, and we started using Pro Tools because because everything was still tape then, and we were doing tape edits.
Yeah.
And I was quite surprised when I went to a professional pop studio, if you like, a multi-track studio, that they weren't using anything digital. It was like you'd mastered to DAT, but really you were mastering to half-inch.
Yes,
DAT was a backup. So I was. That was sort of like, I thought they would have gone on further than that, but the technology was only just
wasn't there. It wasn't reliable enough, though, was it? Really?
No, and so, but it meant that when I first started assisting in engineering, I was sort of at the front of that, the Pro Tools revolution. So I knew, and from my sort of technical training at the college, I learned how to clock systems properly and lock 2-inch to Pro Tools, which a lot of people really struggled with because it was tricky. You had to really know your stuff. Yeah, you had to understand it.
You had to understand the concept, then.
Yeah, so that you could lock the
code and frame rates.
Yeah, and locking the
clocking.
capstan of the machine to a clock to an external Black and Burst video clock and all that sort of stuff, so that the Pro Tools was locked to a solid time. To a solid frame rate, which meant that it sounded good. Whereas if you didn't do that, it sounded awful.
And it would drift, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would do if you didn't lock it all together.
Drifting, wouldn't it? It sort of just, and every time you played it, it would play differently.
Well, I used to get loads of work because from people, because word got out that I could actually lock tape machines to Pro Tools, and it was like this thing. It's like, wow, somebody can actually do it. And there was a chap at Dreamhire who went on to be a producer, and I'm just trying to remember his name. He's a very nice chap.
I remember Dreamhire.
And they used to, me and them, we sort of had worked out how we could get this to work reliably. Yeah. And so I used to get loads of, I got some gigs where it was just like, can you come around and sync our tape machine up? It literally was that.
I don't doubt that at all, because it was a total nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare.
And so on, and then I did... and so I did lots of engineering and programming. I was a programmer for a long time, and I did a few gigs where people, because in those days as well, the studio personnel used to be slightly different. You used to have producer who didn't always engineer, and quite often didn't.
Well, he could be the DJ, couldn't he?
Yeah, he could be a DJ, he could be a band member, he could be an engineer who'd gone up to producing or whatever. And it was sort of, but then you'd always have an engineer, and you'd usually have a programmer as well.
Yes.
And so quite often you'd have an engineer who's running the tape machine, and a programmer who's running Logic or Pro Tools, and sort of working together, and everything would be compiled onto the master 2-inch, and that's how you'd build the song up. And so I was doing one or both of those roles as programmer, engineer for different people, and I worked with a lot of different producers. So I worked a lot with Steve Osborne, and I did some stuff with Nelly Hooper, stuff with Gil Norton, stuff with Stephen Street. So I was very lucky. I worked with a lot of big producers at the time, and learned and saw how they ran their sessions, and learned a lot from them. Yeah.
Is that where you cut your teeth then? That's where you got
that's where I worked. That's where I learned how to make rock records, pop records. So that's where I learned how to produce. So it's from those people, really.
Well, you were doing all this engineering. What is it? What does it take to be a good engineer? What is a good engineer?
It's someone you've got to know your stuff technically. That's really important. And you've got to know it to the point where it's not even an issue. You just are keeping an eye on levels, and you're hearing things if they're going to, you're hearing phase, and you're hearing
pops and clicks,
pops and crackles, and noises that shouldn't be there and stuff like that. And then you can be creative within the sort of remit you're given by the producer. You have to remember that you're working for the producer. So if the producer says, I want it to sound exactly like this, then you have to get it sounding exactly like that. And some of the producers I worked for were very prescriptive about what they wanted. They were like, this isn't the sound that I want. Or you would be essentially plugging things in, routing sounds, getting everything ready, and they would do the sound. They would fine tune the sound because they'd know what they want, and they had enough technical knowledge, or lots of technical knowledge, to do that. Yeah. And you were enabling them to do that. Other producers would be like, get drum sound up, and you would do whatever
you wanted to do.
That would be that'd be your choice. So and they would either like it or not. So but I think it's working as. I think the most important thing as an engineer is your sort of technical support for the whole project. Yeah. So you're achieving the sounds and realizing the sounds to the best quality and the best standard that you can for the artist and the producer. So you're not. It can be very creative. Yeah, but that's not the reason you're there. The reason it's great if you can be creative, and if you get that opportunity to do that, and to inspire people with great sounds, and to say, well, you could try running it through this synthesizer, and you could try running that drum sound through this synthesizer, and it'll sound wicked, and everyone will go, oh, great. But that's
not your.
It was great. It was great when that happened, but that's not your primary function. Your primary function is to record everything. Really well.
It's a fairly anonymous role, isn't it?
It can be, but it's sort of the best engineers are always really they're always really sort of calm, very able, and very sort of easy to work with, and they just sort of make everything all right and make it and give you confidence, and it's sort of they're sort of driving, if you like, and they're not scaring you.
do you personally, even after all your years as a producer, do you still need that confidence sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely great to have a good engineer. Yeah, it really is. It's sort of you want someone who's got their eye on everything, and you don't want. It's always a bit. Yeah, it's because now I'm sort of experiencing it from the other side. It's always a bit of a worry if you're like, I've noticed that crackle, or that's not working, or that's one-legged, and he hasn't noticed it. So it's you can't expect the engineers to know absolutely everything, but when they don't notice stuff, it's always a bit like, oh, really? Do I have to think about that now rather than thinking about all the other things I should be thinking about the song and about the lyrics and about the chords and
sure,
and about the creative direction and sonic direction of things. So that's the real job of the engineer, is to free everybody else up to not have to think about the technical stuff.
Sure. You worked with Elbow on their first record.
Yeah.
And their second record as well, right? The first two.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Did you know that they were going to be great?
The first record was a strange situation because it was kind of the first thing I produced.
Yeah.
And they'd already done the whole record with Steve Osborne, who I'd worked with for years I'd been his engineer for years. And they'd recorded it for EMI, I think, or Virgin, and then been dropped before they'd released the record, which was quite a common thing back in those days.
Yes.
There was a period when that went on a lot, wasn't there?
Well, the A&R man would change.
They spent all the money on recording the record, and then they were once the record had been delivered, they had a sort of decision to make of, well, do they want to commit the same amount of money to promotion, and they couldn't be asked, and they hadn't, and the A&R guy had gone, so there was nobody fighting the band's corner. So so they signed again. They went away after that and did and recorded a couple of tracks themselves, new tracks, which were really good, and then got signed to V2. And then contractual obligations are that they're not allowed to re-record, or they were in those days. I don't know if they're the same now, but they weren't allowed to re-record the record with the same producer, because obviously there was a whole load of stuff on the first album that they wanted to, on their first recording of the first album, that they wanted to redo, or they wanted to use, and they also, as a sort of peace offering to EMI, they had to sort of give them like a couple of tracks on the new album that were owned by EMI to start. It was this real
legal nightmare.
Yeah, you had to do that so that otherwise EMI could just release their version of the album the week before, and not that there was any suggestion they were going to do that, but you have to kind of play the game, and so it was a really weird situation for me because Steve had produced the first album, and he was a good friend of mine, and I'd learnt a lot of him, and they were asking me to produce what I thought at the time was going to be the same thing. So I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And they said, no, we've learnt a lot from doing the record with Steve, and actually, if we feel like it's the second go at it, and there's loads of things we want to change. So we ended up only using one track off Steve's version of the record. Yeah. So one of his recordings, which I mixed again, and then there was another track which I think was quite close to the EMI version of the album, which we re-recorded and gave the rights to EMI, and then the rest was generally new songs actually. So it was sort of so
it's almost like a second album.
It was almost like that. Yeah, it was sort of like a reworking,
a second debut album.
Yeah, like a reworking of their debut album with like, actually we've had if we changed our mind, we want to do this and this. Well, in some ways it was really good, but they saw it as a sort of like, they were great about it. They saw it as an opportunity to be really creative with it and go, right, okay, we're going to change this around. And so we and they were really. It was a great band to do a first record with because they're lovely people, and I got on really well with them, and they're still really good mates now. So it's really good whenever I see them, and we were just really. It was just a really creative sort of playtime of an album. So we disappeared up to Parr Street in Liverpool and did. Which had a massive, great big live space and had stuff set up all over the place, and we're just trying stuff out and there was because they had a couple of tracks ready already that they'd recorded themselves. It was sort of like we just had to fill in the blanks, and so there was a lot. It was really good fun. Yeah, it was very very creative session. Yeah, and then the second one was an absolute nightmare.
in what way?
Just because. It was classic second album syndrome. They'd been very busy touring and playing everywhere, and they'd got a lot of press and a lot of interest in the UK, and so you approach the second album and you haven't had time to write many songs, so they were short on songs when we went in the studio, and they were also worried about, because they'd only done one record, albeit twice. They couldn't quite decide what it was about that first record that they wanted to hold. It's very difficult, I think, for any band with their second record. The hardest thing is not necessarily writing new stuff; it's knowing which elements of that first record are things that you don't want to change, and then having the confidence to change other stuff. And because it's having the confidence to push the boat out a bit without feeling that you're going to lose your identity.
Yeah.
And I think the tendency with bands is, and very understandably, is to sort of almost try and make another first album.
Yeah.
But they were sort of battling with that because they didn't want to do that, but at the same time, they wanted to maintain their identity, and they were sort of like, so the difficult decisions on that record were what makes their sound.
Yeah,
what is the core parts of their sound? And I was sort of saying to them, well, look, Guy's voice and the parts you choose to play, you can play any song and it will sound like you.
Yeah.
You have to remember that, and so just
pursue
the songs. Don't feel
don't feel tied down to anything.
Yeah, don't second guess yourselves.
Yeah.
Pursue the songs to their logical conclusion, and if they're too far away from if they sound contrived or they sound too far away from your band identity, then we'll deal with that later. But it was sort of getting them to the point where they would actually do that.
So when you're working with a band in that situation, the producer really comes into his own then, or their own.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of agendas possibly as well outside of the studio, pushing and pulling
Absolutely.
the band.
Yeah.
How do you manage to maintain that focus? I mean, there's obviously a lot of trust there for you, with the band. How do you manage to keep all that together? What's your secret recipe?
I think,
or is there one?
I don't think there is one really. It's about being on. It's really about honesty with everyone and listening to everybody's points of view, and then not being too scared to say, actually, that's valid, but you need to let other people pursue this. Or it was particularly, I mean, it almost felt like that was the record where I learnt a lot about producing on that record. And you
learned a lot.
Yeah,
about yourself.
That whole period, it was a really full on period, because I just finished Think Tank with Blur, and I had a weekend off and started Elbow's record because we were a bit behind schedule. So I spent like a year working with Blur doing that, and learned absolutely loads, because obviously they were really experienced and very, Damon, well, the whole band were very, very capable. And they'd been through a difficult time on that record as well, with Graham leaving the band getting moved out at the beginning of the record, and so I'd come off the back of finishing that record and all the pressure of that, and gone straight into this Elbow record, which I was expecting to be really quite chilled and back in with my mates, sort of thing. And it was like,
out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah, so it was an interesting time. Yeah.
Let's have a little chat about your stuff with Blur. You've done a lot of them. You've done a lot of stuff with them and Graham as well, in particular. What did you sort of bring to the party with those guys? What did you sort of want to do with that?
It was it was a slightly odd record in that I sort of managed somehow to end up as producer. I was originally brought in, I'd done some work with Alex, probably even before I'd done the Elbow stuff. I can't quite remember it was around about the same time. And I'd done some writing with him and some remixing with him, and gotten really well with him. And he'd introduced me to Graham, and I think I'd done one solo record with Graham at this point. And really liked him. I've been a big fan of theirs.
Yeah, sure.
so they were a very big band at the time, and still are, I guess. And I went in with they were doing a greatest hits record, and I went in with them, I think mainly as engineer, to kind of, because I still wasn't really, I hadn't done that much producing, but I'd done a lot of engineering, so I was still mainly booked as an engineer. Yeah. And we went in to record some, basically to record the demos for this, let's write a new single for the greatest hits record. Yeah. So I went in to record the demo for that, and we recorded this track called Black Book, which was really cool, and I'd got on well with Damon, and because that was my first time I'd worked with him, and we'd sort of fired off at each other a bit, and we'd recorded this track, and I'd sort of edited it into, because what they like to do is, they like to play live and jam quite a lot, and Damon would have the core idea of a song, and it was almost like he was teaching the band the song, and I would record that. Because there was loads of ideas coming out, and then I could sort of say, this idea that you played here is really good, and this bit you played here was really good, and so sort of focus them, and like push them towards different bits, and they say, I like that bit I did there, or whatever. So collectively, out of a jam session, we would edit together a thing that became a
song or a few songs,
or a production as it was, and so. And then and then we'd finish this track, and they go, all right, brilliant, cheers, and gone off and recorded it with a sort of named producer, and I was like, oh, great. And then I heard the version that they'd done with the named producer, and he'd quite rightly had gone, oh yeah, that's great, and recorded it exactly like that, so like so I'd put all this work into this song, and then they'd gone and recorded it with someone, and they'd done recorded a very good version of it. I just felt like, oh, right, I missed that, didn't I? And then we went back in to do a B-side, and we were sort of, and the B-side was, and Black Book was quite a sort of like it was quite a chilled, quite a slow song. Yeah, a nice song. And
it's a good song.
And they and then Damon had this, and all he had was this little squeeze box. So like he got some sort of like little Chinese squeeze box thing that he'd got. It was like something he got out of a cracker or something, or given it by someone. This tiny little thing, and he just had this little. And he was just playing. And it was like, all right, that's cool. And he was like, right, let's write a song about that. Let's write a song around that. And so I sort of sampled that and looped it up and did this stuff. And Damon was quite interested in doing looping based and samples, because he had just done the first Gorillaz record. So he was quite into all of that sort of thing. And I knew how to do all of that, coming from a sort of dance music background.
Were you bringing all of that stuff with you wherever you went? That was forming your way of working? Yeah,
it was. Yeah, a lot. Yeah. Well, being sort of fluent in the digital programming end of things was really useful. So if anyone wanted to go down that road of programming or looping or sampling, it's like that was just my...
Yeah, because all of those records, the Elbow and the Blur records, they've all got elements of that.
Yeah.
And obviously that I'm assuming that's through yourself, really.
Yeah, well, it's stuff that I could do easily, and I could enable people to use that really easily, and I could go with those, and I love those sort of sounds. That's what excited me. So bringing those in would, and so with Blur, that was kind of a thing that they'd worked with William Orbit before that, but they'd all felt, certainly, I don't know if Damon felt it, but certainly Alex and Dave had felt very much like that was a bit of an arm's length experience. They described it to me as like making a film. So they'd turn up, play some stuff, and then disappear again, and then it would come back later, and they wouldn't know which bits they played. Yeah. So it was all edited. There's a lot of editing and creating in the computer that they weren't.
And also a disassociation with the process.
Yeah,
whereas
I tend to do things I do things a little bit of a different way. I tend to like. So the thing I loved about doing the Blur track we were talking about is that we had a little sample that we made, and then I created that. Damon played it, I created a loop for it, and that was a thing that we played with. And so then we'd put the guitar through. So we put the bass through a synth, and I think on that one I can't quite remember. We certainly did with the guitar, and it was like, so they were playing that sound through. I wasn't recording a DI and then doing that later. That was a core part of the sound, and they would then perform through those sounds. So, and that was something that I'm still very into, and it was something that where you create quite an extreme sound, and let the musician perform with it rather than saying, right, you just play through this normal, normal sound, and then I'll make it sound interesting later. So a lot
of producers do that, though, don't they? A lot of people, that's how a lot of records are made now. A lot of records are made with that kind of intent. People playing in bedrooms,
and then fiddling with it in through plugins later. Yeah, exactly. And I would far rather do it at the core. If you're going to have a crazy sound, because one of the other things that I like to, I always remember and always like try and hold on to, is that musicians are your biggest asset in a production. They are where all the good shit happens. They play stuff, and the way they react to the sounds and the way the thing that they put in there is stuff that you cannot create digitally. So if you give them a crazy sound or a really interesting sound that responds in an odd way, then they'll play in a way which might be quite odd or might be quite interesting, but it forces them to be creative and forces them to react to it and respond to it. And we did a lot of that with Elbow on their first record, like doing sounds where the guitar amp was so loud that if you took your hands off the strings, it would just feed back, and then playing it really quietly. So because it was like to inspire someone to play something in a way which is special and different, rather than just playing a normal sound. Because there was a lot of records around at the time that were very sort of bands playing in rooms, sort of straight ahead things, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. And a lot of the artists I worked with didn't want to do that either. So it was sort of pushing the sonic boundaries of things as a way of inspiring the artist.
Where did you get that curiosity from? Because where did you get that idea of, I want to just try stuff? Because
I think
a lot of people are always, it fascinates me as well, is how...
Sorry.
Brilliant. There's the track right there.
I'm always interviewed while sitting at a drum kit.
That desire to create and to try stuff, right? I mean, is that just your imagination? It's like
I think it was something that had always interested me in music. Maybe it's something from coming from being a percussionist. So in an orchestra, as a percussionist, you're like the crazy gang. You're the ones who do all the funny noises, and
you're the outsider, aren't you?
Yeah, and you get to do the interesting stuff. Whereas, like the violins might get the melody, but they've all got to play the same. They're all like drones. You've got to do what the person sitting next to them does, and a little bit unfair. But in the and whereas you are doing the really crazy stuff, and also you're it's. A lot of that really interested me. And then when I started studying music, I really liked the modern sort of 20th century modernism stuff, and I was sort of the stuff that sort of Cage and Stockhausen and Ligeti and people like that, and Stravinsky. That was I found far more interesting than the sort of Brahms and Wagner and the sort of mushy classicalism. I liked the sort of harder edged modern creative stuff just because it sounded really interesting. It excited me, and I think it was also you'd see that on that sort of music you'd see on films. So you'd get it's like films of the 70s and the 80s. A lot of their like the really cool films would have like some really cool Ligeti soundtrack or something like that, and you'd be like, wow, what's that sound? It's like,
and obviously it was the start of analog synthesis and stuff like that would have been around since the 70s or something.
And so synths were I found super exciting because it was really, I was growing up watching too much Doctor Who or something, but it was sort of all those really cool sounds I found far more interesting than sort of an orchestra sound or a piano or a sound that I knew what it was, and I would go and try and search those out, and so I carried that on with with musicians that I work with, and but that I think that was that. Then I went to I think when I first studied music before I worked with the classical people, I was in a music college down in Devon called Dartington, which was really it was a very sort of 60s. It was established in the 60s. So it was very modernist, cutting edge. You know, it was music. There's three faculties: music and art and drama, and or theatre, and it was sort of so it was very modernist, creative, sort of try everything, and I really like that.
Yeah, you were right for that.
Yeah, that's what excited me really.
And then came Depeche Mode after the Blur.
After Blur, it was Depeche. Yeah.
What were they looking for from you?
I'd done some work for Daniel Miller, and I'd done some mixing for him, and I'd done various bits and bobs, and he knew that I was into synths, and he knew that I was using a lot of synths making records, which I think was probably, which for me just was, I thought that was just a cool way to make records, whereas actually for somebody else they were like, that's a bit weird. Because I had when I was an engineer, I sort of had I used to, I've still got a terrible equipment habit, which has to be fed all the time, as you can see.
Yes. I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, sitting in my third studio. And I used to have a rule that sort of, when I was an engineer, that I would only buy. I loved buying synths, but I had to limit myself buying synths. I would only buy synths that you could put sounds through, so they had an audio input.
Okay, great.
So
great
hence ending up with things like MS-20s and VCS-3s and ARPs and stuff like that, because I would use them to mould sound and to modify the sounds and to create sounds for artists to play, So Daniel knew that I was using all these synths, so he just presumed that I would know how to work with synth artists. And it kind of, I guess the combination was, if you look at it from that point of view, the combination was a good one, because they, or should have been, it was fairly obvious it was going to work, because they, in many ways, are essentially a rock band.
Yeah.
A lot of their songs, Dave is a rock singer, and a lot of their songs from not at the very beginning, but certainly in the sort of Songs of Faith and Devotion era around there, they were very they were writing big rock songs, and blues songs and stuff that I liked. That style of song is stuff that I love. And then, but they were doing it with synths, which is what was so clever about what's so clever about their sound. So it made sense that that it would work well as going together. I think that was the sort of thing that Daniel was after, and then I met them and got on really well with them. I wasn't going to sort of turn up and say to them, this is how I think you should make your record. I was far more interested in turning up and saying, well, how do you want to make your record, and how can I
facilitate that?
Yeah, that's my approach really. I don't like to, when I'm working with an artist, especially an artist who knows exactly
what they want,
who has so much experience and knows what they, I'm there to sort of realise their ambition for it, and if elements of my sonic approach are part of that, then that's great.
I spoke to Dave McCracken, which he worked on.
He worked on that first record. Yeah,
and he mentioned something about you wanting to get machines jamming.
Yeah,
because machines are obviously very straight. You press play on one and every machine kicks off.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that jamming thing? What?
I've always found that in modern computer-based music making, you have too much control. It's making things in time and in tune and doing all those things that Pro Tools does is just too easy and too boring. And I think people. I think there's a subtlety to the feel of things, so of machines.
Yeah.
So I think you can hear the sound of a quantized Pro Tools drum kit, for instance, because it has a feel. It has the feel of Pro Tools. It doesn't have the feel of the drummer. And in the same way that you can hear the sound of an 808, you can hear the feel of an 808. You can get 808 samples and program them in Logic, and they sound one way. And you do it on an 808 drum machine, and it sounds like an 808. It doesn't sound like a collection of 808 sounds. It sounds like an 808 drum machine. Yeah. So one of the things that that we were playing with on that record was different hardware sequencers and drum machines and things like that have their own feel to them.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that, and we had the time and the sort of patience to be able to mess around with like jam syncing things and stuff like that. So you'd get so rather than clocking everything together, we would get a sequence running on an ARP sequencer, and then get a drum machine running in time with it, like be it an MPC or be it an 808 or be it like 808 SP12, whatever drum machine, MPC, whatever drum machine we wanted to use. You program it up and it would feel really cool, and then if you put MIDI clock on it, it would sort of like it wouldn't feel so cool.
Yeah.
So we'd spend more time like getting it just jam syncing. So it's like 3, 2, 1.
Like literally just 3, 2, 1.
Press the buttons. Off you go. Yeah. And I'd done some stuff as an engineer, working on some older like remixes of older sort of 70s and 80s electronic music, where they were before you had MIDI and clocking and stuff like that as well. I mean, they had clocking, but things wouldn't sync up. And actually, what you'd end up doing, and you'd get a multi-track for a song, and the feel on it would be very specific, and you'd get it so that you'd feel. There was one song we worked on where it was all based around an analog sequencer, and the drums were sort of like, so they printed electronic drums down. It must be really early, sort of Lindrum style or analog sequencer running, like generating drums. They printed that down through the whole track with a click, and then they'd got a sort of 16 type sequencer part, and it would kept the timing on it would keep moving around a bit, and then because what they'd do is they basically get it in time, record that section over the drums, and then you get to the chorus and it would jump a little bit, and it would come back in like a bit more urgent and stuff like that, because they'd have to jam, because it would go, they wouldn't be exactly in time, and they'd sort of move around a bit, and that sort of thing would feel like although it would seem like an error, it would give the song so much character and movement, and it would mean that when you hit the chorus, everything would go bosh straight back in time again, because they got it back in time because they had a different sequence running for the chorus, and you go bang, drop it in time, and keep going until they got it, till it felt good, and it was all about feel. And I've done loads of that with Steve Osborne, where we'd running when we were doing remixes for Oakenfold and Osborne, he'd program everything up on an old Atari ST, running
the old MIDI,
an S1000. And then when it came to and all the musical parts would be running off 2-inch, and it'd all be synced together. And when we decided that when he decided that he'd written enough, and that the backing track was all really good and the feel was great, we'd print it to tape. And we'd end up printing like 2 tracks at a time. So you'd print your kick and your snare, because they sounded really cool and they were in time. And then you'd print the hi-hat and stuff like that, and you'd be adjusting it slightly each time and making sure that it felt good. And it was all about feel, because you couldn't see it.
That's right, because even the sequencer just would move around all the time.
But you had to do it by ear, because you couldn't see what was going on. Whereas in Pro Tools, you can now see if things are in time. And so you sort of like... and so that was really exciting for me, because I'd spent a lot of my years as a Pro Tools engineer like putting drums in time for people, which was the most boring thing in the world. You could get things sounding really impressive, but they'd have very little soul to them, or character, or there's nothing there that would make you want to listen to them apart from like the first time you heard it was like, brilliant, that's really super impressive. And a lot of 90s music was like that. It was like, that's a great sounding drum kit, it's super loud, everything's bang in time, there would be like digital silence in the gaps and all this sort of stuff, and it would be but it was almost, there was no humanity to it and no character, and so with Depeche it was about, because I loved the sort of awkward clunkiness of their first record, where it's sort of a sequence running, like a little drum machine running the groove.
Yeah.
And then some of the parts were played live and some of the parts were sequenced, and nothing was really that tight. And it was all, but
the songs were great.
The songs were great, and the sound of the backing track, the
Yeah.
character of the backing track was really specific. It didn't sound like anything else because it was made specifically to sound like that, and the way they'd made it had created this very specific sound. And so we did quite a lot of stuff like that, where it was like, I don't want to just get a Logic session up and go, right, great, record that in, and then we'll mix it.
Well, too many people do that now, don't they? Too many people are screen dependent.
It's very, very easy, isn't it?
Let's move on from that to Nadine Shah.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to a couple of her songs on the way down here, and there's loads of sonics going on in her stuff. I mean, it's dirty, it's loud, and I'm not sure what I was expecting to hear when I, put her records on, because I hadn't heard anything, and I was thinking Nadine Shah, so it's going to be a woman singing with a band behind it, and it wasn't that at all. I mean, there is a band at all. How did you get involved with her?
When I was working with Depeche, actually, the Depeche projects are very big and they take up a lot of time.
Yeah.
But you do have gaps in the project, and it's sort of but they were never enough, or there was never big enough headspace for me to take on another album. And I didn't want to take on another album whilst I was doing that because I didn't want to be distracted from their stuff. So I would do smaller things like writing stuff with people and stuff like that, and just trying things out with people, So, and Nadine was one of the artists that I did that I sort of met and tried doing some writing with in one of those periods, and we just hit it off straight away. We wrote her, I think it was probably her first single, like the first time we met, and I'm not particularly. I wouldn't call myself a guitarist or a bass player or anything like that. I can play a bit, but it was almost like with Nadine, it was just me and her in the room. So it's like, okay, well, I'll try a bit of guitar and play the guitar like a drummer would, and things like that, and sort of built these songs out of stuff that I could just sort of cobble together, and stuff that I found interesting, and that was quite exciting for me, having the opportunity to play, because I've never been allowed to play guitar on anybody else's songs, quite rightly too. But it was sort of like I would give myself the opportunity to play other instruments like piano and guitar and to play again, because I hadn't played for years. And I found that quite exciting. And Nadine didn't go, God, you're awful, what are you doing? She was like quite encouraging. And so it developed into this project where, she's got an amazing voice and she's got a great way with words.
Very good.
But most interestingly is her approach to melody, is that a lot of other musicians I work with are very experienced and sort of trained in chord based and song based, and they know the sort of correct way to write a song and all that sort of thing. And Nadine wasn't any of that. She was like she was extremely musical, but she wasn't from that sort of traditional 1-4-5 chord, like learn, this is the sort of cycle of fifths and all those sort of things. She didn't know any of that, and I don't really, I wasn't great at that sort of stuff either. So it was a question of working out her background was much more sort of from sort of Asian music, and that's what her dad played a lot, and rags, and so there'd be a lot of like rags and drones and things like that. There'd be a lot of single chord stuff with really, really clever melodies, really intricate and advanced melodies over one chord, which I found really interesting. So there's a lot of that on her first. So on her first record, it was like 1 or 2 chords per song.
Yeah, I know.
And that's and I found that very interesting, and it also meant that it's something that I could get my head around as a
player.
As a player, I can, because like before that, playing guitar on, I can play guitar a bit, but I don't know all the chords. I'm not fast enough with my left hand to change the chords around and stay up with things like that. Whereas with Nadine's stuff, I actually physically could play it, and it meant that I could learn to play those things well, and or how I wanted to play them. I wouldn't wouldn't say well. And so, and with it being something that that we were writing together, and it developed to the point where it's sort of like it's not entirely me, but where I was generally doing the music and she was generally writing the lyrics and the melody on the top, or she would write a lyric and a melody and I would write the music to it. So we have sort of two basic ways of writing songs, and I found it was just an exciting way to put together rock music in this thing that was a very different way of writing songs. You don't sit there and strum some chords and then sing over the top of it. It comes from a groove or a drum part or a little vocal part or something like that. So it comes from a very different place.
It sounds to me like the inner artist.
Yes, maybe
has come out.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, whether that's a good thing or not.
Well, I mean, the records sound great, and the songs. I had no idea of your involvement in what capacity.
Yeah. And well, then I ended up playing live with her purely because somebody had to play drums, so I had to help.
Is that what you're doing?
So yeah, live I've been drumming with her. I didn't do the second record because it was just after my daughter had been born, but I've toured I did the first record and the third record, and I'm probably going to do this fourth record as well, which we just finished. And it's good. It was funny because it's like getting back into drumming. I did so much drumming when I was a kid. I drummed from the age of 10, really. And then by the time I was 20, I'd just done 10 years of solid drumming and learning and getting up. And I used to do, when I was at school, I used to, by the time I left school, I was doing 2 gigs a week pretty much, and playing in everything, playing in orchestras and bands, brass bands, wind bands, jazz bands, just like anything that would have me, I'd play because I love playing. Yeah. And so it's been quite good getting back into playing again, because it's sort of with Nadine, it meant that because I literally seriously didn't play drums for 20 years at all, and then I got back into playing with Nadine, and it was like, oh, actually, my technique's terrible, but and all my muscles because it's a physical activity playing drums.
It's a great way to keep fit.
Yeah, you've got to have these funny little muscles from controlling the sticks and jogging on the spot with the kick drums and stuff like that. So, but not being sort of, I was quite, by the time I'd finished playing as a teenager, I sort of wanted to be a really tricksy sort of player, like you do when you're a kid. You want to learn how to do all the flash stuff. I couldn't do any of that when I started playing with Nadine again, and I was much better for it. We've done a lot more playing now, obviously, and I actually have to practice these days so I can actually keep up with the gigs. But it's sort of
I'm going to come along to the show.
Yeah,
I'd love to see you play. I'm going to come along.
But it's I have to have a word with myself if I find myself playing too many notes.
What does it take to be a good producer? Obviously, in your opinion.
Production is all about collaboration. You have to, my opinion of it is that your job is to realise the artist's ambition, and to push them further than they might know, or to limit them where they're excessing. But it's all about getting them to perform something astonishing that they love. So it's sort of it's really personality is the whole thing. It's being able to communicate, because I've obviously worked with a lot of different people, and sometimes it just doesn't work. Your personalities don't blend, and you work with people and you don't, and it's sort of, it's not a great thing. Or sometimes you work with people and you really don't get on, but you create a really good record. You don't ever want to work together again afterwards, but you do actually. Yeah, there's a sort of friction there. Yeah. But all the bands that I've worked with a lot, and all the bands that I've been lucky, because all the bands I've been most successful with are very good friends. Like sort of really proper personal friends of mine now, and it is that it's all about the creating the connection with people.
How do you create an environment in the studio for your artists to work in? Do you have like an approach to that? Like, Or do you have the same thing that you do every time? Is there, Ben's way? Or?
No, I mean, there really isn't, actually. I think my aim is to get to the point where I feel like I'm communicating well with the artist. And some artists, that is very, very difficult. And some artists, it's you do it the first time you meet them. And it's sort of... and so it's all... So things... I'm a little wary of doing things by the book, by my own book. I do. I obviously have things that I always like to do, or I enjoy doing, or I did last time and worked well. But I try to avoid those because that's quite prescriptive, and it's quite and it gets you out of a hole sometimes. But the majority of what I do, I like to be performance based. I find if you're spending too long sitting looking at a computer or anything like that, or if it's getting a bit boring and a bit filey, then you're probably going wrong. And I try and work with people who are good musicians or who have something about their playing which I love, and try and sort of nurture that as much as I can, and motivate people to and try and put people in a position where they're comfortable but they're being challenged musically. So you want people. I don't like playing sort of, some producers like to sort of play sort of mind games with people and make people a bit uncomfortable and that sort of thing. And I'm not really like that. I'm much more easygoing sort of chap. But it's sort of I like to challenge people musically.
I guess with your success, you have an element of choice over who you work with.
Yeah.
But when you're up and coming and you're starting, most of us don't necessarily have that choice. You're normally working with the people that approach you or you find. How do you deal with that then? Because, like you say, let's say for Elbow Existence, for instance, they've never made a record, although, as you've discussed, maybe it's slightly different, but maybe a first-time band. Yeah. There's no history there, and there's very little history maybe for the producer. How do you then? There's nowhere to fall back on. There's nothing to fall back on. How do you then sort of approach a project like that? How would you approach, or how would you have approached that?
I think you have to. I mean, I was lucky in that I still do actually only work on projects that I want to work on. I think that's quite important because you're making records. You're not sort of fixing boilers or mending cars. You're doing things. You need to be creative. You need to be in an environment where it is creative. If you're not being creative, then you're probably on the wrong gig. Yeah. And you're not going to do yourself any favours doing that, because I did, as an engineer, I took a few gigs purely for the money. And I was always so miserable, and I always thought I did a really bad job on them. Whereas when I was working on things that I loved, or things that excited me, it's a lot easier to do a good job. I think it's important to remember when you take a project, it's important to remember what it was that excited you about it the first time you heard it, and that works on every level. So the first time you hear a band, I always try to remember what it is that I think is really exciting about them. The thing that feeling about that band or that song that they played. Why was that really cool? Why did you love that? And try and hold on to that and remember that is the thing that's really good about a band. And it's the same with a song. So if you listen to a song and you sort of like go, there's something great about this. So I try very hard to cling on to the first impressions of things, because I think they're probably the purest, and it works for me that way of doing things. Is first time I hear something and it excites me, I'm like that is great for this reason, and I log it and remember that. And then when you're like 6 months down the line trying to get the song to sound all right, you have to go back and go, well, what was really good about it? What did I love about it? And then you have to go back and listen to the first version that you heard and go, oh no, that's that. You see, that thing that we thought wasn't important is actually really important. Yeah. That little guitar part or that tiny little synth sequence there that we thought was just getting in the way actually is the thing that makes it really cool.
How much do you give of yourself when you're working with your bands? Like, do you give a lot of yourself emotionally? Because you
When I'm in the studio, it's all, I'm not.
You're all in.
Yeah, you've got to be on you. Sort of, I'd sort of, I sort of think,
maybe some people aren't. Maybe some people, for some people it's a job. I mean, for me, I'm all in. But
yeah, I think you have to be a little bit careful sometimes that some artists are quite delicate flowers and they need nurturing and they need to feel. It's quite easy to steamroller people sometimes.
Right.
I try really hard to not do that.
And do you do that?
But similarly, you do actually find that with artists the other way. Sometimes some artists come in, and it's usually a nerves thing, but they're so much bravado to get through the session that they won't let anybody else do anything. And you're like, chill out. Let's just do something completely different. Let everybody have an input. Otherwise, there's no point in anybody being it. So,
do you do that just through time?
Yeah, and changing things around. And I don't like things being really super precious in the studio at all. I think you should be. I think you have to remember that musicians can play the part again, and people can sing the song again, and it will be different, and it might not be exactly the same as the first version, but it might be better. And it's sort of, so I'm not like really precious about holding on to performances or holding on to certain things. And I mean, that might be a thing from growing up with primarily digital, but I really don't mind trashing things and moving on and doing totally different versions and then going
great,
because I think that makes things a lot less precious. And I think preciousness is something that doesn't, in most music, something that's really sort of you want to hear a bit of energy and a bit of excitement, and things being really precious and very particular in some environments sound great, but in general they're a bit exclusive. They don't invite you in, and I want to be invited into the music that I'm listening to. I want to be included in it. I don't want to sit back from it and it sort of project at me and go, this is, you're not part of this. I want to invite. I want to be in it.
I think you could probably say that about most art, though, couldn't you? Film, pictures,
yeah, absolutely, yeah,
books.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing.
Some of the best paintings in the world, they're totally flawed.
Absolutely, and it's a thing that I'm learning more and more as I'm getting more and more confident with, is things being really not done, not finished, really messy and
just letting it go.
Yeah, so like I no longer quantize anything. Like drum live performances, they don't get quantized. If it doesn't feel right, you play it again.
Yeah,
and it's the same. So like all of Nadine's stuff, there's like timing errors in inverted commas. Things aren't on a grid. We quite often don't play to clicks and things like that, because it's sort of like, if you don't play to a click, then you can't put it in time, can you?
Is there a process or a piece of equipment or nowadays a plugin that you've always tried to work into a session?
There's stuff that I wouldn't want to do sessions without. I don't. There's nothing.
You name something?
Probably the VCS3. The
Really?
VCS3 goes on everything, pretty much. I don't think I've made a record since I bought it years and years and years ago when they were really cheap. And I think I've used it on everything. Like mixes, productions, recordings. It ends up everywhere. Just because I love it and it's so creative and it's sort of like, it does its own thing. You plug it in. Quite often you plug it in, there's just a noise coming out, and it's usually in tune or in time or something like that. It's like it's
quick,
it's possessed. Yeah, I love its untamable nature. Fantastic. You can try very hard to do what you can try. I've spent hours with it and had it sort of maintained and reworked so that it's in really good condition, and you can. I've got a keyboard for it, and if you spend about a day, you can get like a normal synth sound and play it on the keyboard, and it'll be in tune, and it sounds amazing. But actually, the thing I love most is usually when you plug it in. We have a rule in the studio. All my engineers is like, whenever I plug a synth in, you record everything that comes out of it. Like the first sound that comes out of the synth. It doesn't matter what it is, because I will probably spend ages fiddling around getting this sound exactly how I want it, and then go back to the original noise that was something that it made without any input from me. I thought, that's much better, isn't it?
What do you try to avoid doing in the studio?
So I try to avoid that thing that you can get sucked into doing in digital workstations, where you can put things in time and get rid of noise and put things in tune and all that sort of stuff. I would. That to me is the sort of anti-music. That's the sort of total loss of vibe and creativity. Yeah. And I hear it on loads of bands where you sort of think, I saw this band live and they were really good, and then the record is like the overriding thing you can say about it is it's in time, and it's just not of any interest to me at all.
Yeah, it's a bit like chicken and egg, isn't it? Which came first?
Yeah. It's sort of
the live show or the recorded?
Yeah, well, and often it is the recording, and often people, people do loads of really cool stuff on their laptops in their bedrooms, making records which are really great, but they then struggle to get that through to a full band setup because there's an inevitable loss of control, and it's the control thing that I don't like. One of the best things that Steve Osborne ever said to me actually was that the key element of a producer's job is to finish the record, and it doesn't matter how they do it. So if you're a producer who basically just gets the band pissed and knows really good places to party, but you get a really good finished record, you've done your job. Yeah. And or if you're a producer who has to play every single note on every record and record it all themselves and do all this, that, and the other, but it's a great finished record, you've still done your job. But they're totally the diametrically opposed approaches, and it's sort of and that is, and so for me it's steering away from my engineering background and my programming background, and it's very easy for me to fall into that sort of I know how to get this in time. I can just leave it with me for 10 minutes and I'll quantize it. It's like, what a boring thing to do.
Thank you so much for letting me come down here and hang out with you. It's been great to catch up with you. I'll speak to you soon.
It's really good. Cheers, mate.
Thank you for listening, and be sure to check out the show notes page for this episode, where you'll find further information along with web links and details of all our other episodes. And just before you go, let me point you to the Sound on Sound /podcasts website page, where you can explore what's playing on our other channels. This has been a Mixbus production by me, Kevin Paul, for Sound on Sound.